Let's have a look at how we can manage shoes using foot pivots and pose functions. So let's start out with a blank scene. Bring in our demo character, Juno. And the first thing we're going to take a look at now is that amongst all the fit attributes that can be added, there's something here called foot pivots. What we'll do, we'll just say toggle fit advanced, that toggles to the fit skeleton. We'll select the ankle joint here and say add. And then we just run rebuild advanced skeleton. Now we'll see we're getting a bunch of extra controllers. You can see here we have a pivot that lets you roll off the toe. Here you can move this controller that has now moved the pivot. And it has then also affected the behavior. If you were to do a foot roll, it's now going to use that moved pivot. All right, so the next thing we're going to look at is if we open the pose section, there's some subsection here called PoseFunctions. If you're not seeing the PoseFunction subsections, you might not be on the latest version of Advanced Skeleton. So just go to the About section, click on Check for Updates, and if that enables your update button, just run an update to get the latest version. And then you'll have this section with PoseFunctions. So a couple of things going on here. We have the ability to add any object or any attribute to the built-in default pose that any Advanced Skeleton rig comes with. The other thing we have an option to add additional poses. So let's just create a sphere. And first we'll observe that if I move anything in the rig, I hit the button that says here, go to build pose. It returns to the build pose. The equivalent is to use the selector and use pose reset. That essentially does the same thing. Now what we can do, we can say we want to add another object to be part of this. So let's say this sphere. Select the sphere and say add this object. And it confirms to you, want to add this object? Yes. Now, if we are to strike a pose and also make any adjustment to the sphere, if we hit go to build pose, you see that has returned those values to that sphere. So that sphere has now been added. And that's essentially what we're going to want to do. We are going to want to here select the shoe geometry. And I'm going to highlight the visibility of this shoe geometry. And I'm going to say add object to attribute. It tells me, do you want to add the following? The shoe visibility. And I'm going to say yes. Now, what that means is that if I were to hide the shoes and hit the button that says go to build pose, you'll see that they have become visible again because the shoe visibility is now part of the build pose. I'll do that one more time and use this pose reset and you'll see the shoe becomes visible. All right, so far so good. What we're going to want to end up with here is a button that allows us to switch onto bare feet. And when we do that, we're obviously going to want the shrink under close attribute to be off to show the proper feet. So first of all, we're going to make this attribute part of the build pose, which is not by default. And it's going to be on by default. So all I got to do is make sure that that's on, select the attribute and say add attribute. It confirms. Do you want to set this shrink under close, add it to the go to build pose? Sure, yes. So this means that now we can go ahead and create the system that goes to bare feet. And when you see now, if we go reset, which is going to turn back on the visibility of shoes, you'll see that that has also turned back on the shrink under close. Next thing, we're going to want to make a new pose that we're going to store using the store pose. It's going to be called barefoot. And it's going to appear here in the drop-down menu when we create a new pose. So we'll start out with what it will take to get to that pose. And the first thing is going to be setting the visibility of the shoes to off and turning the shrink under close off. so that we can see the feet. Now, we can go ahead and save this as a start for our barefoot pose, but it obviously is not finished yet because you can see just turning off the visibility of shoes means the character is now hovering slightly above the ground, which is something we're going to address next. But before we move on, we can already now go say store this pose, call this barefoot, and we can now test it. So we can say pose reset, shows the shoes, and pose, we now have a new one called barefoot, and it shows the bare feet. So we can switch between the two. Okay, so far so good. Now let's improve on the barefoot pose. Firstly, we're going to make sure it doesn't hover above the ground, which obviously we're going to want to move these down. But you can see just moving these down is not going to be quite correct. We are going to also want to include moving down the root controller. So I'll go to side view here to make sure I get this fairly accurate. Move it down to touch the ground. And so, okay. We're going to need to adjust these pivots, which we'll look at in a minute. But for now, we can just update the pose. So it includes this moving down. We again click store pose. You'll see by default, it remembered the last name. So I'm just going to click OK, and it'll confirm, overwrite the previous stored foot pose called barefoot. I'm going to say OK. Again, we'll test reset and barefoot. Reset, barefoot. As you toggle between the two, you can see it's now doing all the things we've told it to, which is hiding the shoes, showing the normal skin under the shoes, and moving the whole rig down. So far, so good. We are now going to look at these pivots, because if we now look at the foot and the side view and just try to use the roll function, you'll see something's not quite right. So let's go ahead and move the pivots. We'll grab this guy, move that right to where that needs to be. Likewise, the one on the back, move that. And we'll test. Let's now use the roll function. You see that gives us a much better foot roll for the bare feet with this improved location for the pivots. So let's go ahead and store this as well. Let's hit store pose. It detects all the changes in the pose that we've done. And we use the same name and overwrite the old barefoot. And we can now toggle between reset the default and barefoot. And you see it's now doing all the things we've told it to. Hide the shoes, show normal skin under the shoes, and move the whole body down to touch the ground and move those foot pivots. So far, so good. That's all working as we wanted to. Now, there's one more special situation, and that is high heels. If we have high heel shoes, it's not just moving the whole thing up and down. It's essentially what needs to happen is this angle needs to change, but we also want to keep everything in its original world space orientation. Let's have a look at how we can do that. And just so we have some geometry to look at, let's go ahead and create some super simplistic high-heeled shoes. We'll just use a cube. Okay, so that's not very pretty, but it will be enough to show the principle. So let's say we want to have another pose here now next to barefoot. It's going to be another one called high heels. So first thing to do, let's go to build pose. We want to make these simplified high heel shoes part of our system here. So we want to set up the default, which is going to be that the visibility by default on these guys is going to be off. And we select the visibility attribute and add it to the system. So add attribute. Okay, so that has now added these to the default, which at this point, all that means is that if these shoes are visible and you hit reset, they'll become invisible. Then they're going to become visible when we go to a pose called high heel. So all we have to do is say store pose. It's going to detect that what is not the default here is that they have become visible. We'll call that high heels and store. So that automatically becomes a menu here called high heels. And we can now test by saying reset, go to the default and go to high heels. And all it does now is just deal with the visibility of that geometry. Let's now deal with the necessary pose to go to these high heels. Actually, the next thing I'm going to do is just turn off the visibility of the normal shoes. And we can hit store pose again. That's going to update our high heels. Let's test, reset, normal shoes, high heels, hide the normal shoes and show the high heel shoes. And we'll start moving towards this pose that it needs to go to actually work with the high heel. Select both IK feet and the root controller. We'll move all this up, up. And let's also do what we did with the normal barefoot pose is we're going to make sure this shrunk underclothes attribute gets turned off. Let's keep improving the high heel pose. Now use this attribute called the foot pivot high heels. Let's look at the side view. Essentially, it rotates the ankle but retains the world space orientation of the whole foot roll system. Now what's a bit special with this simplified high heels geometry here is that it doesn't flatten out. But that's no problem. We can compensate for that by just rotating this controller down. We'll just do a quick skinning on this simplified high heel geometry so it makes it a bit more clear to see what we're looking at. You can see foot roll will now pivot on the heel of the high heel. Likewise, the toe pivot, that's also now in the right place. And also quickly note that these controllers are quite handy to move the pivot around, but you might not want to see them all the time. And there's a visibility control for them here called FootPivot Visibility. You can turn them off. And there we go. We can now go between the poses. We can reset to go to the default setup, which is our character with his shoes. We can go to bare feet, which drop the character down to the ground, hides the shoes. And we can also go to high heels, which gives us this super simplified geometry high heel shoes. All right, that covers how we can manage shoes using foot pivots and pose functions. I hope you have enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next time.